Hey guys, welcome back to the Creative Restoration channel. I'm Doug Giles. Today's project, we're going to be making this cool holster. Now, this isn't just any holster. This is a holster for the Smith and Wesson 500 Magnum. Now this is a behemoth of a gun. And I looked and I couldn't find a holster that matched, well, didn't do what I wanted it to do. Everything that I found actually set way too high up on my waist. And with this 8 3/8 inch barrel, I really didn't want to have to pull all the way up here to clear the holster so that I could draw the gun. So what I did with this is I extended, now this is obviously for your belt, and I extended this portion down and flared this out. I also gave it a cutaway right here so that I can add a scope onto this pistol later on down the road, if I want to. It doesn't interfere, having the cutaway doesn't interfere with the operation of the holster and the gun without a scope, so I may or may not put a scope on there. Now, the pattern on this, I actually started out with this pattern, which, as you can see, this one does not have the cutaway right here for the scope. And it also has one other detail on it that I didn't particularly care for, and that's this 90-degree turn. Now what that did is, in this section of the gun, well, the sight kept getting caught up on the inside up at the top. So it was rubbing the inside up there, kind of tearing it up, and I didn't like that. So we made those modifications, and this is the pattern I came up with. Now, speaking about patterns, something crossed my mind. Since I couldn't find this holster online or anything like it, I decided to make my own, right? That's why we're here. You know, something crossed my mind, and that's that you guys out there might have a similar issue in finding a holster that properly fits for your 500 Magnum, that puts the pistol where you want it when you go to draw. So, one thing that I've been thinking about doing is creating a PDF file for this pattern and selling the pattern. Now this is a holster that you guys could easily make yourself without all the power tools, without any heavy equipment or anything. All of the stitching that's done on here can be done by hand. All of the sanding that's done can be done by hand. And really, that's the only two parts of this holster that I actually used a machine on. But it could be done by hand. It would just take a little bit more time. So what I'd like for you to do is in the comments down below, let me know if this is something that you guys would be interested in. I'm thinking somewhere between the $15 and $20 range for the pattern on this. So let me know down below if that's something you'd be interested in. Now another thing too is I'm a Amazon affiliate now. I've recently gotten set up with Amazon, and I'd like to open up an Amazon store. Now, all of the tools that you would need to make something like this by hand, most all of them are available on Amazon. So what I'm thinking about doing is going ahead and putting those, putting links to those products in the description below. And that way you guys have a one-stop place where you can get everything that you need to make this holster. Now, without further ado, let's get into making it. So we're going to start off with some 8 to 9 ounce Herman Oak leather. That's veg tan leather, and we want to make sure that our orientation is proper. I'm right-handed, so make sure I've got the correct side up on the leather as well. It doesn't matter if you're left-handed or right-handed. Make sure that you get that orientation proper. And we're going to do quite a bit of speed up throughout this video. All in all, I guess, for me, doing it with some equipment, the sewing machine and sander, it sped this up, and I managed to get this holster put together, I guess, in about 5 working hours over the course of about 3 days. Now this is a Tandy leather knife that I'm using. And again, if we do the Amazon links down below in the description. I'll have this in there at some point in time. But we get our leather cut out. And during most of the speed up portions of this, you know, there isn't an awful lot to have to say. So I'm going to let you guys listen to some music. But we get our leather cut out. Sharpen our knife. One last pass. There we go. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go in and cut my stitch grooves. This is going to let me know pretty much, you know, this is going to let me know where my stitches are going to go. It also gives me a boundary for tooling or anything else that I want to do with it on the inside of the holster. It lets me know that's where my stitches are going and there's nothing going on the other side of that. So what I'm doing now, I take a scratch awl, and on the pattern I have it marked out where that second row of stitches are going to go, and then I take my stitch groover and I just freehand that in. And we'll go ahead and we'll start casing the leather now. And then, as you can see, I have the blue painter's tape behind it. And that's to keep the leather from stretching when I'm doing the tooling. Now this is just a simple border stamp that I'm doing using two. You can pretty much use any two border stamps that you want, or any stamps that you want really, that will create a border. And I leave, I guess, about 1/4 of an inch in between each one of these. I put a second stitch groove along there to give a little bit, you know, break it up a little bit more so that I have a border in between my stamping and my stitch groove, or my stitches. I'm going to have an additional space. And we'll go around and finish that up. And I'll put links again down below for the craft tool stamps that I'm using, the Tandy craft tool stamps that I'm using to do this. So if you want to go with the exact same pattern, yeah, at least you'll know what tools to use. So we've got our leather tooled up. Now what I'm using here, this is just some 4 to 5 ounce veg tan leather that I got from Tandy Leather, and it works okay for liner leather. I don't particularly care for any of their heavier leathers for tooling, but for liner leather it's alright. And the glue that I'm using here is barge glue, and I actually thin my barge glue out with a bit of acetone, and we're giving it a double coat of glue. So our liner is done. We take our main shell of our holster. We're going to do the same thing. Catch all the way up to the edge. And on our liner, you want to make sure that you go well past, cut it out oversized and coat the whole thing out. That way you're certain that you have the whole thing. And we're going to do a double pass of glue on this on the shell of the holster as well. And we'll set that aside for a little bit. Usually takes about 20 to 30 minutes for it to tack up well enough that you can actually put the two pieces together. So we just, coat them out, set them off to the side for about 20 minutes. And notice I have a piece of paper underneath there to keep from getting glue on everything. So we'll put our liner down first, upside down, with the glue up. And we'll put the shell of our holster. And you want to line it up exactly where you want it, because once those two surfaces touch, that's it. It's down. That's it. There's no getting it apart after that. So we'll press it down, and then we'll go over to our granite block. And really all I'm going to do here is I just want to go around the perimeter. All I'm doing is sticking down the perimeter quite well, pounding down that perimeter of the holster. And then I'm going to trim out my excess. Now I didn't show it here, but after I get done with trimming the liner, I go back with a dead blow hammer, rather large dead blow hammer, and finish, pounding out the rest of the leather to get everything to stick and adhere quite well. Now on trimming your excess, it's always better if you go leave a little bit of excess rather than try to get all the way up against the shell of the holster, because you can always sand some away, but you can't put it back. This is one of those things, if you cut it too short, that's it. It's ruined. You're going to have to do it again. So, like I said, if you've got the opportunity to, leave yourself a little bit of excess, a 1/16 of an inch or so, it's better to sand that off than to cut off too much. So once we've got that done, we're going to go. Now I have a stiffener piece. Since I did that cutaway there, I didn't want the top to be floppy, so I put in an additional piece of 8 to 9 ounce Herman oak there, and I tooled it. I don't show me cutting that piece out or tooling it. You'll see me gluing it up in a little bit. But you rough up that edge anywhere that you're going to stick the two pieces of leather together. If you've got a finished side, you really want to rough that up to give that glue something to adhere to. So we'll get that coated out, and there's that little piece I was telling you about. I'm using that as a stiffener. So right there at the very top, we've got a full at least 16 ounces of leather up there at the top. And once the holster's formed, it is stiff. It does not move. Now I'm using Fiebing's Pro Dye in Show Brown. And I like the Pro Dye because it doesn't matter how many times you coat that piece out, it's not going to get any darker than what that dye is designed for. There are some dyes out there that if the more you put it on, the darker it gets, and it never seems to stop. Well, the Pro Dye, when you put it on there, you give it 2 or 3 coats. If it's as dark as it's going to get with 3, even if you put 5 or 6 coats on there, it's not going to get any darker. Now on this particular one, I gave 3 coats on the 3 coats front and back. I think I may have even given a 4th coat on the front just to make sure everything was even. Now with that Pro Dye, it is possible to go too light, but it's not really possible to go too dark. So once we've got all of that adhered, we put our piece on after it was, or before it was dyed, our stiffener piece up at the very top. We went ahead and we dyed it and stuck it all together and pounded it out flat, and now we're at the sewing stage. Now if I had this holster to do over again, that stiffener piece that I put up at the very top, the bottom edge of it, I would have taken a little bit of time and remembered to slick out that bottom edge of that stiffener. but it still came out very nice. The end product was very nice. Now the machine I'm using there is a Cobra Class 4. Most of you guys are not going to have a Class 4, and like I said in the intro, this can be done, all of this stitching can be done by hand. You don't have to have a sewing machine to be able to do this. You can do it by hand. A saddle stitch would work quite well with this holster. I'll pull the thread out and I'll do 4 or 5 stitches going forward. Take the piece out and then start off where I left and then back stitch. My stitch will actually start 5 stitches in and then back stitch that 5 stitches and then go forward. So I end up with a back stitched holster. And there we go, all stitched up on our top and bottom. Notice I did not stitch the sides because that's when we're going to close it. So what we're going to do next is I use a pair of dividers and I'm looking for where my glue line is going to be on the inside. So I go to my stitch groove on the front and I put my dividers at that mark right there. And then I'll flip over the holster and transfer that mark onto the back. And that lets me know where my glue line needs to be. Do it on both sides. And then I'll take the pattern. And if you notice, the pattern is basically a mirror image of itself. Our 2 sides are mirror images. So I'll flip the pattern over, and just like I did on the front side to mark out my stitch groove with the scratch awl, I'll take those perforations and take my scratch awl and poke little holes and mark where our glue is going to go there. Then we'll go back to our roughing tool and we're going to rough up that edge. Since that is a finished edge, don't have a finish on it, but it's a finished edge, or finished side, I should say. We'll rough up that leather to give that glue something to bind to. Do both sides. Now here's a neat little thing, that barge glue, if you put your glue on there prior to soaking your holster, because you're going to soak your holster in water after you're done with this step here. You apply your glue, let it tack up, and then soak your holster in lukewarm water for about 20 to 30 minutes. Don't worry about the glue. That glue will still work just fine even though you submerge the holster in water. So we do our 2 sides with our glue, and then I do it off camera here, but I soak the holster for about 20 minutes in some lukewarm water and get it ready in preparation to make our fold and close up the holster. So it's been soaking now. Our leather is wet. We fold it over, match up our side. And then we're going to start pressing it down. And press down kind of firm. Once we do that, we're going to let that holster sit overnight and let it completely dry out. Especially if you're going to use a sewing machine like I'm going to. So the holster is dried out completely. We'll go ahead and we'll put our stitches in that go underneath the frame and the trigger guard. Do our 4 back stitches. And then we'll run forward and we'll close it up. And for some reason my sewing machine wants to, I guess it's the combination of the thick thread and the thick needle. When I'm going really slow, it has a tendency to want to bind. If I go fast, it doesn't have that problem. And it only, for some reason, it only wants to do that going back over my back stitches. Going, you know, when I go forward from the back stitches. And I'm moving kind of slow with the machine here because I really want to stay in my stitch groove. And now we're going to do our final closure here with our stitch. Do our 4 back stitches. Maybe 5. There we go. Yeah, 4 back stitches. Throw it into forward. Go a little bit faster. And then again, once your stitching is done, once you've done your final stitching, you're going to soak the holster again in lukewarm water. Submerge the holster in lukewarm water. You can use your kitchen sink, assuming it's big enough. Now, this particular gun, the whole thing is made out of stainless steel. So I just put it in the holster, the wet holster, exactly the way it is. Had this been a blued gun, I would have absolutely wrapped it in shrink wrap or saran wrap. So I'm fitting it in for the first time, and I'm putting a little flare at the very top on the outside of the holster, making sure everything fits properly. And then I'm going to grab a 3/8 inch dowel that I've cut down to size, pull the holster out just enough that I can get that dowel in there. I want to run right along the top of the barrel. It'll go in for a little bit and then it'll stop. So I'll push the gun in the rest of the way, and then I'm going to take a hammer and just lightly tap that dowel rod in until it just barely touches the back of the sight. Very, very light taps. That's all it takes. Now what that does is that'll give you the clearance that you need when you're drawing the holster, that the sight doesn't get caught up on the inside of the top. So we'll let that sit overnight to dry. Actually, you can let it sit for as little as about 4 or 5 hours and it'll retain its shape, and you can pull the gun out, dry off your gun, and then let it sit the rest of the night overnight, and then proceed to sanding. Now again, this can be done by hand. You don't have to have a drum sander like this. But you're wanting it to be nice and even across there. And where I have those additional 2 pieces of leather for the stiffener piece on there, I'm going to sand that as well to make sure that those are nice and flush with each other as well. So once everything is done, it's going to almost look like, on that seam, it's going to look like one piece of leather. Now all of my long parts, just do it by hand, sand it out by hand, and I find that it's much better if you just go long straight strokes or go strokes in one direction. Don't try to rub back and forth. You only want to rub in one direction. And make sure you get all of your rounds, your curves, where your cutout for your for your scope goes. Make sure that you get up in there very well. And then we'll come back in and we'll do our edge beveling. And you can see this is how good that stiffener is. That extra piece of leather on there. I'm pushing pretty hard on there, and it's not flexing. So next we're gonna do the finish on the exterior of the holster. And I say exterior because you need a place to hold it. So I stick my hand on the inside. And I like to use a cotton t-shirt rag. Get a bit of Restorations on there. That's Phoebing's Restorations. And to get a real nice finish, I find it's much better to go with light coats. Go with multiple light coats as opposed to one heavy coat. You go with one heavy coat, there's a good chance that you're going to get drips and runs. You know, and that just doesn't look good. So it's much better to go with multiple dry passes or light passes and build up the finish rather than try to tackle it all at once. So I do the exterior and I hang it up to dry for a while. And usually it only takes about 20 or 30 minutes. And before I get too far, I want to go ahead and put our belt holes in. Now I'm using an 1 7/8" belt loop punch, belt hole punch. So we get both sides of that done. And then we'll come back to the Restorations and we'll do our interior. This gives the exterior a chance to dry. You can actually work with it. Now once the exterior is dried up, you know, you can manhandle, not manhandle it, but you can actually hold on to it pretty good, and you don't have to worry about smudging anything or leaving fingerprints. So once we've got that, one of the last things that we go to do, we're going to do our edge coating. Now mine's pretty simple. Start off with some water. That's just water on a wool dauber. And you're going to go over all of your edges. And then I use a bar of glycerin saddle soap. And on this, less is more. You don't want very much of it, just enough to kind of reduce the friction to start with. And again, you see the slicker tool that I'm using there. Again, you don't have to use a slicker tool. That same 3/8" dowel rod that you used for the sight, that'll double as a slicker. So you go over all of your edges until they all come out nice and shiny bright. They'll start reflecting light. You run your hand over it, it should be silky smooth, glass-like smooth. So you go over all of your edges and then you let it sit for several hours, maybe with a fan on it, and then come back over it with some brown Phoebing's edge coat and catch all of your edges. We'll do our edge coat on all of our edges. Now there's several different ways that you can go about doing edges. I personally like edge coat because you can easily touch it up. And don't try to catch everything all in one shot. You know, go over it. Again, another one of those things, less is more. It's better to do multiple passes than to try to do too much at once. You don't want any drips, you don't want any runs. You just want to go right up next to right up at the edge of this. And if need be, you put 2 or 3 coats on it to get good coverage. but just don't try to do all of it at once. And there we go. And the edge coat will dry to pretty close to the same color as that show brown. Well, there we have it, guys. That's the holster. Let's get a close-up. It's nicely tooled. Stitching is nice and even. Love that color brown. That's actually Feeding's show brown for the color. Now this tandy leather kind of takes color a little bit wonky. And if you wanted to, you could go with all Herman oak on this particular holster. That wouldn't be an issue. Our seams came out really nice. Our edges came out really nice. Everything's nice and smooth. Our insides are done for our belt loops. But how's it fit? Well, you see for yourself. Fits like a glove. This holster fits absolutely perfectly. Now, I specifically did not add retention on this holster, okay? You know, it's a gun that weighs 4.5 pounds unloaded, 5 pounds loaded. So, you know, as far as it coming out of the holster, if you're riding a horse or if you're riding a four-wheeler or something like that or tromping through the woods, it's not really going to come out of the holster. You don't really have to worry about that. However, if it's something that concerns you, you can always do something like this, which is add a couple of holes right here below the cutout, add a couple of holes, and just put a strip of leather with a piece on top with a slit in it, and that can be hammer spur retention. You just put that piece of leather right over the top of this in that slit, and that'll keep it from coming out. So, now this, you know, as I've been making this holster, I think I'm going to make it again. Maybe do something a little bit different with the tooling on it. It's not quite to my taste. I like the color. I like the design. I don't think I'm going to change anything about that. I just want to change up the tooling to suit me a little bit better. So, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this holster for sale on eBay. Now, the price on it's going to be $185 plus $15 shipping. I'll provide the eBay link down below in the description. If you happen to go to that link and you know it shows that it's sold, or you get a 404 error, well, I guess that means that this holster sold. So, but if you want me to make you one, send me a line. You know, drop me an email, and you know, we can definitely talk business and you know get you a really nice holster. So anyway, so that's our project for the day, and we'll see you on the next video. By the way, like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.